Welcome to episode 4 of the Church Triumphant. This week we'll be continuing with our series Life Together. We're up to chapter 4. Ministry of holding the tongue. Often we combat our evil thoughts most effectively if we absolutely refuse to allow them to be expressed in words. It is certain that the spirit of self-justification can be overcome only by the spirit of grace. Nevertheless, isolated thoughts of judgment can be curbed and smothered by never allowing them the right to be uttered, except as a confession of sin, which we shall be discussing later. He who holds his tongue in check controls both mind and body. James 3:2. I really like this passage for 3 reasons, and there's 3 importances that I think he gets down, like he nails. The first is in the importance of speech, and he actually cares about how we talk about other people. The second is his importance of confession, and that speaking about other people wrongly should only be done in a matter of confession. And the last one is the importance of stillness, which I think he sort of encapsulates with the end with James 3, verse 2.
When you say that speaking about other people should only be done with confession, like, what do you mean by that?
You know what? I think the next passage might help to clarify that. I'll read the next passage to give a bit more context. But to speak about a brother covertly is forbidden, even under the cloak of help and goodwill. For it is precisely in this guise that the spirit of hatred among brothers always creeps in when it is seeking to create mischief. So I think the context he's trying to say, or he's been saying this, is within the context of talking about another brother or sister. And often, even though, we might have good intentions at first, it can very quickly lead to situations where, we're dogpiling this person, or, it allows for this sin to grow where it shouldn't have grown in the first place, even though we had good intentions. So I think that's why at the first part he says, except as a confession of sin.
Like, of your own sin?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. I was like, wait, you mean confession of, like, their sin or our sin? I was like, wait, what? Yeah. But yeah, I remember reading this chapter and it reminded me of, because we recently went through How to Love Your Church.
Yeah.
And like, you know how it talks about, everyone should be doing this and that. And so when our group was discussing it, I noticed that maybe like 80% of the things is like, oh, this is just the church culture. This is what some people do. And it's all on the church and like very little, oh, I'm doing this, which I noticed. And I'm like, if the whole church, if it's a church culture's fault, then it's like, but aren't you part of the church? So where do you come in then?
Yeah. I think it's like, it's a trap too, to like say, oh, it's just the culture's fault. But it's also like, I don't know, people, almost everyone who I talk to in church, including myself, like definitely including myself, does this. And I think it's like, it's odd because we have such clear boundaries for everything else. Like we have such clear boundaries for like dating or like sexual immorality. It's like, if you shouldn't be talking to girls past 1 a.m. like, and then, people give you sort of weird vibes and stuff. But the sin of gossip is one that we don't have very clear boundaries on. Right. There's no boundary where everyone's like, it's sort of, unspoken of standards.
And it's not like we don't have a boundary on speech, because like we have a very clear boundary on swearing. Like if someone swears in church or someone says like, I don't know, oh my God or something, like the whole church is like, what's going on? But we don't have the same thing for gossip, or not even gossip, just speaking negatively about other people. Yeah.
I don't know about you, like maybe you do have these too, but there are times when like, a bunch of guys come together and we're just like sharing our weeks. And then one of the people will start ranting and is like, oh, my week sucked because of X event. and this person sort of contributed in that way. And there's times in my mind where I'm like, I feel like we shouldn't be talking about this, but at the same time, I understand that like in order for you to share your week, this is part of your week, but it also unintentionally brings up this person in a not so good light.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he continues after this second passage with about like 3 quotes from the Bible. But I think Ephesians 4:29, I don't know, it was something of a bit of a highlight. Ephesians 4:29 says this: "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building up others according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." When I was reading this, I thought for the first time, this is not just an ideal, right? This is something that he's actually telling us to do.
I think that like relating to the earlier bit you read when he says like, don't speak evil at all against anyone, at least in my mind, when I first heard that, I was like, that's a bit extreme. Like, everyone has faults, what if you're trying to pray for them or something? But really, he's just taking that Ephesians passage seriously. Like, to take that seriously means that you're never going to speak in a person negatively at all unless it's like explicitly, so you're discussing like how can we help them or how can we be praying for them. But that's not how we discuss people most of the time, at least in our circles, when people talk negatively. I think it's that like this part that always gets me, where it says, "For it is precisely in this guise that the spirit of hatred among brothers always creeps in when it's seeking to create mischief." Like, it's, even though it might be unintentional, I think it's like it presents opportunities for sin to like come and manifest itself, even though everyone there is like, oh, we're doing this for good, and it very might well be, but yeah. Or maybe that's just what you say. It's like you tell yourself, we're showing prayer points now. And I like how Bonhoeffer says in a guise.
Yeah.
So like you don't realize that it's bad. You just go through it, and like in the moment, I think like especially when you have someone's done something that's annoyed you, it's kind of like you feel that burning in your chest. You're like, I want to share this, and it feels good to share it.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize that in that moment you're speaking evil against your brother and sister. And I feel that is a very big struggle, because it's not just trying to not have the intention, because you can have good intentions, you can genuinely just want to share your week, but it's like you have that urge. It's like I want you to speak, show them what this person did, get them to agree with you, and be like, oh, yes. How could they have done that? And it's like that. I think it's like what he says, that urge for self-righteousness. You want to be justified, and especially if they're not even there, it's like they can't say anything. Yeah. So it's like you're presenting your case. Yeah. And you just want to be seen as right.
Yeah. It's sort of like when you're in the shower and you're just like replaying the same argument over and over. And always in your mind, you always come out as like on top. You always come out like as right, because the person obviously isn't there to defend himself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that is the difficulty, that deep down, the reason why it's so easy to do it isn't because like we necessarily have malicious intents, like we want to make everyone think this guy sucks, but it's our own desire for ourselves to be justified. And
I think it's like this deep-rooted sense of pride at the very end of it, and he talks about that later. But I think I want to put this quote into the discussion. He'll be able to cease from constantly scrutinizing the other person, judging him, condemning him, putting him in his particular pace where he can gain ascendancy over him, and thus doing violence to him as a person. Now he can allow the brother to exist completely free person, as God made him to be. his view expands, and to his amazement, for the first time he sees, shining above his brother, the richness of God's creative glory. I recently finished Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and in one of the chapters, he hit like such a true point. He made an interesting observation. He said, hatred fuels hatred. So like the dislike of someone is perpetually like continued and fueled on by only disliking this person more. The cycle stops though when we actually put love in the mix. And it sounds so weird that, you know, once you show love to the person you dislike, you actually begin to see them in a different light, and you begin to appreciate the things that they do. But I think what makes that hard is that it starts from you. Like, it's not an external force that comes along randomly and then, you know, then you start to feel nice and happy and you look at this person in a different way. It's, you gotta let go of like whatever dislike or hatred you have against the person. And then you can begin to like restore this cycle so that it's wholesome and it's upbuilding and edifying.
And I think to add to that, like, maybe in some cases, not all of the cases, but the reason why you might dislike someone is like, maybe deep down you feel threatened by them. And so like the self-protection mode is just be like, oh yeah, but they did this thing wrong, so like screw that person. I'm better than them. So yeah, I think you're right. And like, especially in Mere Christianity, Lewis is onto something when he says like how fundamental pride is. And like you don't, I think that you wouldn't ordinarily realize that in just everyday life. But yeah, if you dig down deep enough, pride is such a big underlying motivator for even these seemingly unrelated things, like having, I don't know, being upset at someone.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think that's why it makes this so much harder, because it's such a like huge sin that basically all humanity would struggle with. So to sort of free ourselves to like actually not speak ill of someone is so much more difficult, not only because there's like heaps of other sins that might be attached with the like current situation that's going on, but all of that is then like built on the foundation of your pride. But it also makes it easier in some senses, because like once you start to chop at the root of the tree of pride, you know, all these other sin, like all these other problems might become like to be resolved. You know what I mean?
I mean, that's a very big root to cut down.
True.
Like, it's a simple concept.
Yeah.
But the actual cutting down is so... I think pride is a lot more deeply rooted than you might realize.
Yeah.
Especially, the more deeply rooted it is, the less you realize how deeply rooted it is. Yeah, but I can definitely see it like in my own life, and like I'm just thinking, like, especially if there's someone that's like done something which I'm just like, yeah, they're gonna like that. Like my mind always instinctively find like some little aspect that I can be like, yeah, they're falling short there, or I'm doing that and they're not doing that, so you know it's all Gucci. And it's like I feel that underlying it is like, it makes me feel a bit better about myself.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, you know, that guy annoyed me, but you know, he didn't do this, or he doesn't do that, but I do that, so I don't need to worry about him.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Yeah. And it's always that sense of like, you know, he mentions this here where he says he can gain ascendancy over him and thus doing violence. It's always that like, I need to one up this person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when Bonhoeffer writes that, I'm just like, how does he see human nature so well?
Yeah.
I'm like, what does it take to see this? It's crazy.
Yeah. He sort of continues with a different point, but he writes this. God does not will that I should fashion the other person according to the image that seems to be good to me, that is, in my own image. Rather, in his very freedom from me, God made this person in his image. I can never know before how God's image should appear in others. The image always manifests a completely new and unique form that comes solely from God's free and sovereign creation. When I thought of this, I thought of like SJWs because I'm just like surrounded by them in class. But I think the quote, it sort of shows how the church actually resolves so many of the world's desires and problems. So one of the desires of the world at the moment is this whole like buzz around diversity and freedom of expression. Like we want people to like express who they are, right? Is this like that phrase like love you for who you are? Like you don't need to change because people should just love you for who you are. There's a bit of problems with that, but I think it's interesting how like the church can solve so many of the problems. Like in the previous episodes we've been talking about, we're talking about how church unity comes from a divine reality, and it's not just some random social construct or human invention that we made up. We're actually united, and that resolves like problems at the moment with racism and this whole phase of these types of things with like social divide and whatnot. And I think in this part, it actually does resolve parts of like diversity and allowing people to be who they are by allowing God to work through them and for him to manifest his image in them rather than us to like try to force our own ideals onto this person.
Like it's like how Lewis says, like when you're in God, that's when you truly find out who you are. But who you are is not something that's like, you don't become yourself by like trying to stand as this sole individual towering over everyone else, but you find yourself as you become more in Christ. So it's like it's almost paradoxical, because it's like the more you are incorporated into Christ, the more you become more of like who you are as an individual, which like it's counterintuitive to a sense.
Yeah.
But I think with the freedom thing, I think even in church circles though, there's that temptation to not respect people's freedom, in the sense that it's like because like these higher spiritual truths, you're like this spiritual person, and then the other person who doesn't know as much as you or doesn't do as much as you do, then you think, if only they just did this, only if they just followed me, if only they just did what I told them to do, then everything would be solved. At least I feel that temptation.
Yeah.
Like I'm just like, why do these people just do what I say? And like, from my point of view, it's like, I'm just saying what's in line with scripture. Like I'm objectively right. I have God's word on my side. So it's all on this person. Like, why are they not doing that? So like there's a potential for more pride and arrogance because like we have this higher truth, but we can be misled to thinking like, we kind of own that in its totality, and so well, this person needs, like, they need to listen to me.
Yeah. It's such a weird irony that like having a deeper understanding of God's word leads us to be more prideful. I can't remember, like my mom has like this bookmark from like I think the Reform bookshop or something. I can't remember what it's called, but it has like a quote from Calvin. And I think Calvin says something like, the point of doctrine isn't like for you to speak it, it's for you to do it. I'm like, oh, that's very true. A very good one-liner. Something along the lines. And it's interesting that like, I have the same feeling. You're definitely not alone in that. There's times when people come to me with a problem and it's like, Why don't you just follow like Matthew 18 and just speak to this person rather than like, try to rant to me about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Bonhoeffer sort of continues and he talks about how our community ought to be. Strong and weak, wise and foolish, gifted or ungifted, pious or impious, the diverse individuals in the community are no longer incentives for talking and judging and condemning, and thus excuses for self-justification. They are rather cause for rejoicing in one another and serving one another. Each member of the community is given his place, but this is no longer the place in which he can most successfully assert himself, but the place where he can best perform his service. When I read this, I just read like that last part where he says, but the place where he can best perform his service. And it's something that like we've always mentioned. It's like this ideal of like, if I serve you and you serve me, then both our needs are met. But this image of like Jesus washing his feet washing his disciples' feet just came to my mind when I was reading this. It was something like being willing to go beyond expectation and standards to going to serve people, right? So like in the New Testament, like in Acts, like people are willing to sell their real estate to help other people, and that's like, I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard of that being done in Sydney. It's
true.
It's going so beyond the like expectation and standard of helping someone that it's just like unheard of. And I think that's like sort of contextually what was happening when Jesus washed his disciples' feet. It was like not even the lowest people in society were willing to be that humbled to perform such a service.
I feel that everyone talks about service, like, yeah, we gotta serve each other, the whole point of church is to serve, should be serving, and like that's true, but I feel that there's a danger where like we say it so often that it loses its meaning, and then we forget that biblical service, how it looks like, is like a complete self-giving without any like expectation of return. Well, there is an expectation, but not in this life.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is not an easy thing to do. And like, it's so easy to fall into the trap of like, you're serving, but somewhere back deep down, you're thinking like, I'm only serving as far as this. Or it's like, I'm serving, but I'll just give them as much as is appropriate, and then I'll back off. Or it's like, I'm only going to serve as much as this person does this. So it's like, we kind of fall into the worldly way of serving, where it's like a transaction type thing, where it's like, as long as I get this, then I'll keep on doing it. And if I don't, then I'll stop.
Right. So like, do you think like this, I've been thinking about like buzzwords lately, and I've been thinking like, does the church have many buzzwords that we use, in that like we use it so frequently, but then because we use it so frequently, it changes the language of what it means. So for instance, I think like the word service, when we say it in church quite often, it doesn't encapsulate what the biblical service typically means in the Bible itself, or how it might be shown in stories in the Bible. But I think we've sort of narrowed down what we meant by service by saying, it's generally like cleaning up after service, or like vacuuming the floors, or just general church maintenance, or like going over someone's house to give them food or whatever. Like,
do we really think that? I mean, have you actually heard someone say, we should all be serving by cleaning up after church? Like, I feel that that's something that a very small number of people do.
All right, touche. But I think like the point I'm trying to get is, when we say service, we have a very narrow understanding, or like these are the things that we expect generally when we say service.
As in like, it's limited to a few a set bunch of activities.
Yeah.
I'm
But-
thinking like like the typical dropping people off. I'm
Yeah.
serving them.
Yeah.
And I think the ironic thing is it's like that then can be used for more self-gain because you're like, yeah, I need to buy a bigger car so that I can serve people at church.
Yeah.
Or like serving people, inviting people over. Like, I've heard this said many times, you know, we want a bigger house so then we can invite people over. But then, like, at least the people I've heard it say, they didn't actually, and they invite people over like a few times, but like 99.999% of the time, it's just them in the house.
Yeah. And I think it sort of relates back to what you were saying with like the guise of good intention, like allows sin to come. Like I'm definitely sure that, you know, they did have the intention of having people over and whatnot. But I think I think the danger of that is that you're putting yourself into a standard where, you know, you have to actually invite people over to maintain, that purchase, I guess. Yeah. Bonhoeffer sort of continues, and this is where he ends the ministry of the tongue, and he moves on to the ministry of the meekness after this. He writes, "Once a man has experienced the mercy of God in his life, he will henceforth aspire only to serve. The proud throne of the judge no longer lures him. He wants to be down below with the needy and the low, because that's where God found him." I think last holidays, I went out with a few sec editors, like a few people from my faculty, a few Christians, and we were meeting up at Newtown. And I got there early. I got there like 5-10 minutes earlier. And eventually, like, one of the other guys, he messaged us and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to be like 15 minutes late." I'm like, "Oh, great." And while he messaged, when I read that message, the other person came into the station. And he lives at Newtown, so he passed by like this homeless person. And he came to me immediately, and he I don't think he's greeted me. He just said, "Hey, do you have any money? Like, I want to get something." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I handed him like, I think $20, and he went over to the like counter, like at a shop, where the homeless woman was sort of saying, and he just bought her food. And then afterwards, he gave her the food, and he was like, "Hey, we're actually we're actually Christians. Can we pray for you and like just listen to you?" And I think that was so odd, because it was like, we have 15 minutes waiting for this person. And I don't know, like, if I have 15 minutes, I'm like, I'm going on Facebook, I'm going on Reddit. But he's first, like, he walked past someone and saw that they were in need, and he was like willing to like sit with this person and just listen to her, and what's been going on. The same person also, like, he's an international student, so he's from Hong Kong, and yeah, the stuff in Hong Kong really distresses this person, and he's often like posting on Facebook about how dire the situation is. And he told me one time when he was about to go back, I asked him like, "Oh, you know what you're gonna do there?" And he's like, "Oh, I want to get some like soya milk and just give it to kids when they're like going to school, because no one's really thinking about them." I'm like, wow, that's a very like, yeah, if I was thinking about going home, that would not be my first thought. It wouldn't be to go help the people in that situation. And I think this person, he sort of encapsulates part of what Bonhoeffer is talking about when he says he wants to be down below with the lowly and the needy. Like, he's willing to, you know, actually go out of social norm and to actually interact with the people who you typically wouldn't interact with.
And that's a very big thing. Like, that's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm walking past a homeless person, like, if I'm by myself, then maybe I might try to look at them. If I'm with other people, I'll just be like, tunnel vision,
Yeah.
this person doesn't exist. Like when he says lowering yourself, like you're literally, I feel like that is lowering of yourself. Like it's a, in some way you are lowering your status by talking to these people.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, sometimes like status can be a bit abstract, or you can pretend it doesn't really exist. Like, you know, everyone's equal. I see everyone the same. But when you walk past that homeless guy and, you know, you're with your bunch of friends, or you're with like a group of people, and you just ignore them. Like, I think that you can see that a very powerful manifestation of status. It's like, I don't want to seem lower by talking to this guy.
Yeah. And it's not even something that you consciously think of. It's not like, you know, I'm going to sit down, and because I'm sitting down, I'm more lowly than everyone else. It's like, yeah, it's sort of subconscious in some ways.
Yeah, but even though you're not explicitly thinking it, like, nonetheless, it's still such a powerful influence.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think anyone is thinking when they walk past a homeless guy, this man is of low status. If I look at him, I will be lower status, so I won't. Like, no one thinks that, but they know it deep down inside.
Yeah. I remember listening to a podcast by Tim Mackey, and he was mentioning how he's reading something about faith, and he said there's 3 levels of faith. So the first level of faith is what you say to people. So it's like, oh, you know, I believe in diversity, or I believe in equality, right? The second level of faith is the level which you think you have faith in. So it's like, I think I'm not a racist, or I think I'm not, or I believe in, I don't know, the law, or I believe in freedom of speech. The last level of faith is the clearest indication of faith, and it's what your actions say you believe in. And I think like Peterson sort of mentions this, where it's like, if you want to, like, faith, I can't remember how he defines it. It's like, faith is believing, he says something like, it's sort of along the lines of like what James mentions, where faith is most clearly indicated by what you do. So he says, like, if you want to really see someone, if you really want to know what someone believes, just watch them. And if you just watch them, you will understand what they believe in. And I think, like, this example of the homeless person is an indication to me that I'm not very humble. I'm not willing to follow the ministry of Jesus. Because Jesus was like, you know, he was willing to go to the people of the sick. He was willing to go to the people who were blind and had leprosy.
Yeah, that's a very convicting thing to realize. And I think it makes me kind of scared, because I'm like, you know, I've grown up in church my whole life, and I've been around church people my whole life, and it's like, if church is pumping out all these people who aren't actually willing to serve how Jesus did, then, like, what are we doing? And I'm at the forefront of that. So, like, where have I been complicit in contributing to the situation where it's like, even though I can acknowledge and see that, yeah, service is good, we should be serving like Christ, we want to be more Christ-like. It's like, when it comes to actually doing it, it's like it's still almost unheard of. Like, I feel it's not if a church person did that, that would be like a unusual thing.
Yeah, I think it's like what I was talking about before, about it's widening our scope of what service means. And I think right now our scope of what service means is the things that are sort of comfortable. So for the example that you brought, it was like driving a youth home. It's like, it's sort of like inconvenient. It's like 20 minutes, 30 minutes out of my way or whatever. But it's still relatively comfortable. Like you're just driving, like you're sitting in your car for an extra 15 minutes. Whereas like actually going out of your way to, I remember like at growth groups you asked like maybe we can go, or you suggested maybe we can go to pick up rubbish. Like that's uncomfortable, I reckon, because you have like a lot of people looking at you. They're like, "What's this guy doing?" Or like, you're actually participating in something that isn't necessarily seen by people, but is important nonetheless.
But slowly.
Yeah, yeah.
And you would hope that, at least in a group, if everyone's doing it, then everyone would be willing. But you would hope that's the case. But I feel that isn't the case. So it's like, what is going on? And how am I being a part of this? And I think when you say, like, you said something, like people willing to serve, like, to a point, like something which isn't too uncomfortable. So it's like, it wouldn't be unsurprising if a church person like gave money to the demonstrate. Like I feel like that's pretty that would be pretty common. But I was chatting to the I don't know what his title is, like the team leader of the Youth Catholic Society staff, and he was talking about when he did like a homeless sleep out, and like he was actually talking to them, and like he was telling me how the homeless in Australia, they don't need money, like they have plenty to live off, just because like Australia's so good. We have like food banks everywhere, there's government support, so they can get enough to like materially survive. The biggest thing is people lack is dignity, and that's to give that to them. Like you can't do it just by chucking money at them. If anything, that degrades them, because like it puts you in the place of the benefactor and them like in the place as the beggar. And like I actually there was like some homeless dude at Para, and I was chatting to him. He actually said that, he literally said, it's degrading, but it passes the time. And so giving money doesn't actually give them what they need, but if anything, it almost serves us, because we kind of like, our conscience is soothed. Like we throw money, we don't feel bad about passing a homeless guy on the street anymore. But what they really need is someone like, so the guy was giving me advice, and he was like, if you want to help a homeless person, then don't give them money. You go down eye level, and then you talk to them, ask them how they're going, ask them their name, like connect with them as a human, which actually means going down to their level. And it's not something as easily done as chucking a coin and walking away. And actually talk to them and ask them, can you get them anything if you want to get them something. But really the biggest thing is giving them that dignity.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes service hard. Like service should be hard. It shouldn't be a comfortable thing. And I think it's hard in that situation, at least. It's because you're trying to form or build a relationship and actual human connection with a person. And the problem isn't, like as you were saying, it's not solved just by throwing money at the problem, like at the issue. Like it's a much deeper, more complex issue that like we as Christians have a response to, which is the gospel, right? Yeah, often like when I pass a homeless person, sometimes I would give them money and stuff, but I would never give them the gospel. Like I would never sit down at their level and say, hey, like I understand what's going on, but Jesus, like he can resolve, like he can give back your dignity. He can invite you into a kingdom that actually lasts eternally. Yeah. There's one part where I think this Bonhoeffer sort of mentions it. Let me try to find it. Here. We must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God God will be constantly crossing our paths and cancelling our plans by sending us people with claims and petitions. We may pass by them, preoccupied with more important tasks, as the priest passed by the man who had fallen among the thieves, perhaps reading the Bible. I just wanted to throw this in the mix because it seems so relevant, but it's such a common thing that we wouldn't stop our schedule in order to meet the needs of this person. But I think what really struck at me with this passage was when he said, God will be constantly crossing our paths and cancelling our plans by sending us people with claims and petitions. Like throughout the day, not everything would always go our way. Not everything will go according to our schedule. That's just the way life is. And how I usually interpreted that was in a negative way. Like things don't go our way because, maybe I'll fail a unit or maybe the girl I like doesn't like me back or whatever, or I won't earn enough money to buy a house. But I've never thought of the opposite way, which is things don't go our way because of a positive opportunity that comes our way, which might be discomforting.
It's like your way needs to be disrupted so that you can go on a better way.
Yeah.
But the thing is, in the moment, that way is not the way that you want to go. And yeah, that's quite a good point to bring up, because I remember sometimes just because I'm waiting around, so you're at the station or whatever, and you're just watching people pass, and the homeless guy or whoever's begging, and it's everyone's just so busy. They all got their train to catch, they all got their schedules to get to, and I myself, I remember there's been times where I'm going to the station, there's a guy, I'm like, hey, I need to catch my train though, so I'll see you later.
Yeah.
And it's did I really have to catch that train? Is it really when I'm on the train, I'm just reflecting. I'm is it really so bad if I'm half an hour late because I was helping this person? But why is it so hard for me to do that?
Yeah. For context, what we just read was part of his section called the Ministry of the Helpful. And he continues in this section by saying, it is a strange fact that Christians and even ministers frequently consider their work so important and urgent that they will allow nothing to disturb them. They think that they're doing God a service in this, but they're actually disdaining God's crooked yet straight path. They do not want to live a life that is cross and balked. But that's the part of discipline of humility, that we must not spare our hand where it can be performed as service, or that we do not assume that our schedule is our own manage, but for it to be allowed to be arranged by God. When I read this, I was thinking about my school, and my school in year 12, they had this thing called a mentor program. And basically, each person's allocated sort of like a senior teacher. So a year 12, year 11 teacher who's teaching the subject. And they might just randomly email you and they'll be like, hey, can we meet up at your free period or whatever? And you'll be like, yeah, sure. And they sort of just talk to you about life. Anyway, the mentor I had was a very kind person, and he always asked me about ministry and what I was doing in my free time. And I'm like, I'm just reading books. And I don't remember how we got to this, but he mentioned something that I've never forgotten since. And he said, Jesus' time on earth, his ministry, wasn't done by just reading scripture all day. He actually went out of his way to meet people and to speak to people. And it's you think about that and it's holy crap. The God of the universe, this guy who's come to earth for a very specific ministry and mission, came and stopped for the leper. He came and stopped for the adulterous woman, right?
Yeah. I feel like there's there's a really big significance to that like right now I'm honestly just like I don't really feel it. Maybe it's because I'm not in ministry, but like I'm just like, yeah, that's big. But I'm just like, how do I do that? And like, just to slightly make a counterpoint that he started his ministry when he was 30, so he had, assuming he could read when he was a kid, that's like 30 years of reading and studying.
Did children then like read scripture like as we do?
Well, they're not. I assume it would have been more communal based.
Yeah.
And like if everyone's going to the temple every year and learning, and they're going to the synagogue every week, I assume they teach it. Yeah, I think like it's like a very Jewish thing that they learn to read and memorize the scriptures.
Yeah, that's a very fair point.
But the point still stands that all that reading comes to a point where, like, now it's time for action. You can't just perpetually be reading. And like sometimes I feel the temptation is like, you know, because most of the time I'm just I'm just studying, I'm just chilling, and I'm just like, you know, I feel like I'm not really doing that much. I feel like I should be doing more, and I'm just sitting here reading. Like, maybe this is just, you know, it's my time to read, but like part of me, I kind of feel that something's missing, that like I want to do something, but I'm just like, I don't know how. So most of the times at the moment I just end up going and washing the dishes, but like I still feel that there's like I'm not here just to read books. Like I'm here for something more. And I remember I think it was 2 weeks ago when one of our church members' moms passed away. So we were cleaning, a bunch of the dudes were just cleaning up the church for the funeral. And I was on the pressure washer, so I was just like washing the pavement, and like I thought it's gonna be like, you know, it's gonna be all nice pressure cleaning, but I didn't realize how like narrow the jet is. So you have to like kind of like pretty much over every square centimeter like move the thing. You can't just like blast it as a whole. And especially when you get to the cracks in between the pavement, it's like the water will get all the dirt in it and spit back. So like I was washing and there's like freaking like dirt all over my face. There's like dirt going in my eyes. There's like dirt like I was looking at my hands and they're just like covered in dirt. And I'm just like I'm so filthy right now. But as I was washing it was a Sunday afternoon, and you know, I'm just washing. Everyone else was like, I think they were cleaning the hall, so they were like all inside doing whatever. So I'm just washing and like full of dirt, and then I just got a feeling. I'm like, this feels so good, and I didn't know why. I'm like, I'm literally just like, I'm literally doing dirty work, but there was just something about it which felt so right, and I was just like, this feels so good. And like I feel that there's something deep within us that knows that we weren't just made to sit around in luxury, and we weren't just saved so then we can, you know, sit down, receive a sermon, and then go out, have a lunch, enjoy ourselves. I feel like deep down we know that we're made for something more.
I think it's that call to adventure, you know, like the hero's arc where, you know, the call to adventure, like it's a really scary, like I think of Frodo from Lord of the Rings, and you know, he knows how difficult the mission is. Like, it's basically impossible to bring like the ring to Mount Sinai. Oh, not Mount Sinai. What was it? The
Mount Mordor?
yeah, that's the one. Mordor. Sinai. Yeah, and like there's like a like whole army, but like it's that calling. But I think the point that you mentioned, I think it was like a 20th century philosopher who says like, if the utopia was ever brought in, the first thing we would do is destroy it, because like humans by nature, like we just want something chaotic. We don't want things to be still. Like you'll get bored of just sitting on a chair being fed grapes by like goddesses or whatever. It'll get to a point where like I actually want to make something of this.
I feel like that's G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That's my instinct, because I've read that recently too.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Like it's so weird that Sydney is one of the most theologically trained like regions in the world. Like I think we have more training as a uni student, biblical training that is. Once you go through like the EU or like campus ministry courses, then I think like African pastors, which is like, I don't know, it's just insane to me that we're more like, at least theologically, we have more training than these guys, yet they're making disciples, right? They're doing things with their lives with it. And part of me just thinks like, it's not necessarily a waste of potential, but it's like, we should be, I say this like as if it's easy, but it's definitely not. Like, but yeah, it's not like we're not equipped, right? We have the ability to do things. Yeah.
And like, if we are so theologically trained, my question is, in light of what true service looks like and how we're talking about, you know, if you're truly knowing God, then you're actually going to do something. Then, yeah, why aren't the Christians flooding the streets? Why aren't all the uni students, you know, going out and lowering themselves to, go and serve the most lowly? And I'm sure there are some people are, but I feel that the majority are not. And so my question is like, you know, are we truly being trained, or are we just being like puffed up? Like, is this all this training, all these conferences we go to, are they really making us more godly, or are they just making us more prideful? Because I feel that the true godly person will be doing more of this serving that Bonhoeffer is talking about in this chapter, that lowering. And like, I feel that uni students, like, if you ask them to go out of their way to do something, like, the default response is like, you know, I'm so busy, you know, if I have time I'll fit it in. That's like, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
But mostly it's like, oh yeah, sorry, I'm busy.
Yeah. And
it's like, yeah, well, what are we really building ourselves up in if that is so common? And that we still, like, even you and I, who have received a lot of training, or as you put it, like theological training, then what's wrong with us that we don't do that? We still find it so hard to serve how Bonhoeffer is talking about, which is how Christ served.
Yeah. It's interesting that, like, when we think of giving our life away to Christ, the first thing I think of, at least, is like, I'm going to become a missionary. I'm going to become a minister. And that means, like, I'm giving my life away to Christ. Like, it's going in a full-time position, like, giving all my time to Christ, like, in that way. But in reality, it's not necessarily that way. Like, yeah, like, I never heard of someone who's like, I'm going to give my life away to Christ, and that means I'm going to go serve the lowly, while staying in my full-time secular position, right?
Yeah. Like, I feel that when you say, like, you think of doing a mission or being a minister, like, even though not explicitly, I feel that that's low-key what, like, is glorified from the pulpit.
Yeah.
Or what people, when they say, like, go and serve Christ, like, the underlying message is like, yeah, you guys should consider doing full-time ministry.
Yeah.
Like, that's what they're really saying. And so, yeah, we think of being a minister or being a missionary, like these roles which are glorified to an extent. But we don't think I'm going to become a nobody and have no one recognize me and put myself down, and the only person who's going to say is God, which I think is so much closer to what true godliness actually aspires to be. We don't think of that. We don't think, I'm going to serve God by putting away my status or putting away my security. And like I was at a conference about mission. It was what was it? CMS, summer school.
Oh, yeah.
And the interesting thing was, like, not to cut down these missionaries, like from all the reports, I'm sure God was working for them and they were serving faithfully. But it was interesting to me that one of the main reasons why they were returning was because, like, they wanted better education for their kids, or like it was getting dangerous there, or like the government was cracking down. And it's like, yeah, those are very understandable reasons why. But at the same time, I don't know, it just struck me. I'm like, they all seem like self-preservation reasons, like all to do with improving their standing or their security or their kids' security, which, like, are very understandable things. Like, I want that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look like to me of, like, throwing everything away and going all in on this thing. Which, if you read, like, some of the accounts of the missionaries in the early church, or even the church expanding to new places, like, these guys, like, for example, the missionaries in China, like, when they were cracking down Christianity, like, these guys were getting tortured to recant, and they just kept sending missionaries. And even while they were being tortured, they would convert, like, some guard, and then that guard would go on to, like, spread the gospel even though he would be tortured. In Japan, like, there was, like, one region that became Christian, and then when they went into isolation in I forgot what it's called, but it was like 17th to 19th century, I think, where Japan pretty much shut out all the Europeans. All the, like, the priests and the Christians there, they pretty much, like, tortured them and forced them to either recant or, like, say, like, yeah, I'm not Christian. And they're still, like, you can read up on about how Christians in those moments, they still were like, no, I'm gonna, like, proclaim Christ no matter what. So, like, in those situations, like, you can clearly see these guys are giving away everything. Like, it's not just a career for them, it's like their whole life. And so, like, I wonder, in our church context, when we think of being a missionary or being a minister, like, do we really think of, like, we're giving away our life in doing this, or are we still thinking of it as, like, a career choice?
Yeah. This isn't targeted to missionaries. It's more of a general statement, but it's more like when you're saying, like, or thinking of coming back to Australia for education and stuff, these are the things that like no one will call you out on. Same with like the house and the car example, where like you have good intentions. It's like, oh, I want a bigger house so I can serve more people. No one's gonna call you out on that. No one's gonna be like, do you really need like 1.2k or 1.2 mil like house or something? Or like same with a car, like yeah.
No one's gonna say walk everywhere or live on the street.
Yeah.
Or like, let your kids suffer and be illiterate.
Yeah. But like, it's not even like, you don't even need to go to that low of a level of saying like, hey, you shouldn't buy a car, you should just walk. It could just be as easy like, hey, you could have just spent 2k on or 5k or something. You don't need to like triple that your price budget just for like that nice shiny new car.
No,
like,
only triple. Yeah. I think people go far beyond that.
But yeah, like I think this is for me too. Part of the struggle I have, like when I feel that people aren't giving it all to Christ, is actually calling them out on it. And having those difficult countercultural conversations with people of saying like, maybe we shouldn't be buying this much bubble tea. Granted, I buy the most out of my friend groups. Yeah.
But yeah, that's true. Like, it's hard to call them out, first of all, if you're doing it yourself. It's like the whole speck and the plank thing, except it's very clear that you got the plank in your eye.
Yeah.
And it's like, even though we say all these things, like, who are we to say if we're still participating in it ourselves? So, like, I don't think you can. I don't think you have the right to call people out on it if you're still actively participating in it. And then secondly, even if you did call someone out, like, it's so easy to just get defensive, and like the defense is it's like it's waiting there. Oh, you don't want me to just like enjoy myself? You don't want me to have a car? You want me to just walk everywhere?
Yeah.
You want me to like not be able to get to work?
Yeah.
How dare you? And everyone is going to defend them. Oh, not everyone, but I think most people would defend them because deep down, like, they themselves want that. Like, they would defend them. So to go against that means like you actually have to give up any hope of being seen right in that moment. Like, everyone's just instantly going to shut you down.
Yeah. And I think if you do defend that person, you're now putting yourself at that standard, right? Because it's like, at least I believe that, you don't need a car. So then it's like, oh crap, I guess I got to live by that standard too, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's actually possibly a very big reason why people don't do it, because then they'll know that, now I said this, I have to actually live it out.
Yeah. But that's also the scary thing, that like it constantly like reinforces each other, and it like perpetuates this like our culture of being comfortable. Because if even if one person wants to like be uncomfortable, like it's hard for him to have other people who are like, I think we should be willing to forfeit our comfort for the gospel. Like it's hard to actually change the community in such a way. Yeah.
I mean, we say it's hard, but I feel that, look, if this is God's will, then really this is one of the easiest things we could do if we just trusted in God more and had faith that he would do it and carry it out regardless of what everyone around us would think.
Yeah. I want to move on to at least one more section before we run out of time, because this chapter got me good because it's all about ministry, and like I'm quite involved in ministry. This is the ministry of the bearing. So he says, the Christian, however, must bear the burden of a brother. He must suffer and endure the brother. he then continues and says, "It is only when he is a burden that another person is really a brother and not merely an object to be manipulated. The burden of men was so heavy for God himself that he had to endure the cross." For the first part of at least the sentence was, it got me the idea of like, in our church, we're not very good at rebuke. Like myself included, I'm not very good at rebuke. And I think one of the reasons why I think we're not very good at rebuke is because rebuke is a relationship thing. It's not like I'm going to speak to this person once, I'm going to have that uncomfortable conversation, and then yippity do, like everything is all good now. It's, I'm going to endure and bear with this person's sin. And that's really hard, to actually endure and bear with someone's sin.
So you're saying it's hard because to rebuke them means you have to bear with their sin. Does that mean like because it's acknowledged?
Not only that it's acknowledged, it's also like, because I don't think rebuke just ends at the conversation. Because the whole point of the rebuke isn't just to like tell someone off. It's to target the sin and for the sin to be identified, and then for the process of mortification to slowly begin. But in order for that process, or not necessarily, but that process of mortification is supported with community and with brothers who can help you in that sin. So I think like when we rebuke someone, in some ways you should be so concerned not only to bring the word of God to them, but also to be loving enough to help them with that sin and not just leave it at the conversation.
Right. So it's because it's like a ongoing commitment.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah. Because the sin doesn't it doesn't magically disappear after the conversation ends or when they like acknowledge that they're sinful.
Yeah. Or that's even if they acknowledge it. I reckon 9 times out of 10 it's gonna be more like why are you saying this?
Yeah.
Why are you being unloving to me?
Yeah.
Why are you discouraging me? Yeah.
I'll continue with one of the quotes because I have example to share. It is the fellowship of the cross to experience the burden of others. If one does not experience it, the fellowship he belongs to is not Christian. If any member refuses to bear that burden, denies the law of Christ. So I've been watching a bit of The Simpsons lately, and The Simpsons is like it's something I grew up with. And I got to this episode where it was like April Fools, and I think the whole premise of the episode was like Bart was trying to prank Homer, like his dad. So like he was trying to think of what's the best thing I can like troll this guy with, and he was like just watching him as he got like this beer out of the fridge, and Homer was like, beer, my Achilles heel, if you will. And then Bart's like, holy crap, that's the idea. So he gets like a can of beer to like this paint shop. And I don't know exactly what it does, but I think it's meant to open like the top of the paint can or whatever. But it does it by shaking it. So like Bart just put this beer on this thing that shakes. And it's like he shook it for like hours or whatever. And then he came out and there was like this can. And it was just like, it was basically like jelly because it was so violently shaking because it was gonna like explode. So then he puts it in the fridge, and then like Homer, he's watching TV, and Bart like turns up the heat. So he wants to he's dehydrated, so he wants like a drink. So he goes to the fridge and he opens the can, and when he's about to open the can, like Bart says, "April Fool," and then like the whole house just explodes with beer. It was like basically like an atomic bomb. Anyway, the example that I wanted to bring with this is that's sort of like our sin. It's like we don't know how many worms there are in this can. It's so deep like some of our sins, that it could be like decades worth of building up resentment, building up bitterness on this one thing. And what makes it even more difficult is it isn't just this one can. It's like 3 of these cans that are all attached with this one thing. And all these different sins are playing like a part into like this problem. And I think that's the scary thing for me when you bear the burden of a brother. Like, if you really want to bear the burden of someone's sin, it's not easy. It should be hard because sin it's so complicated and so webbed often that it should take a long process to kill off sin.
That was a very long-winded example, but your point made so much more sense. I was like, I get it now. I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, to take a step back though, I feel like our problem is more so just getting to the point where we're pointing out the sin in the first place. And my feeling, or for me, like what makes me so hesitant is that to point out someone's sin means I'm not just making them uncomfortable, I'm making myself uncomfortable. And so like that, I think it is my own desire for comfort and to like my own desire to not undergo pain and discomfort. I think for me at least, that's probably the biggest thing which stops me from pointing out people's sin. It's that, I don't want to be in this weird situation where I've just like told someone off. Like, I'm not even thinking about, I'll have to bear with them, I'll have to make a big commitment. I'm not even thinking of that. I'm just like, in this moment, I know saying this, like I have a conviction deep down that I should say something about this, but I feel that saying something would lead to an extremely uncomfortable situation. And I will confess that more often than not, I don't do it. And I think deep down the main reason, or one of the biggest reasons for me at least, is discomfort and my unwillingness to go through that.
Yeah, I think part of the process of like actually bearing is 2-way, right? Like, one way is actually the person who's bearing, and the other person is the person who's like burdened. I think it does come out, like this process of bearing others person's sin does come out with rebuke, but I also think it comes out with like just sharing. So like from the point of like discomfort, I find it very uncomfortable to share some of my sins. Like, I have a few accountability groups like you're a part of, and there's just certain days where like I had a horrible week, and I really don't want to go into the group and share like what my sins were. It's so uncomfortable. Like, I don't know, like even though we've been meeting up for like what, 2-3, almost 2.5 years now, it's still such an uncomfortable process. And I trust you guys so much, but it's so hard to share your burdens with people.
And then it's like, if you're struggling so much on the weight of your own sins, it's like you're just not in the right space to go and be pointing out other people's sins and bearing with them. And it's like, if it just between me and you, it's like or just two people in anywhere, there's always that massive barrier. It's like you're both struggling with your own sins. You're barely getting by yourselves. Probably one of you isn't getting by. And then it's like, and you have to bear each other's burdens. It's like, if it's just us two, then like that's almost impossible. And I think the the crux of why Bonhoeffer says this so like forcefully is that, yeah, for Christians, it's not just us two. We have Christ who helps us to bear that. And it's like, so we're not alone, and we actually can do that. That's the whole point of why Christ brings us together. And so even though we've been talking about how difficult it is, it's like, I think Bonhoeffer's right, and it's hard, but this is exactly what we have to do, and Christ is waiting there to help us, and it's in Christ that we are together, and in Christ we can bear each other's burdens.
Yeah, he definitely mentions that in like the first part of the chapter, where it talks about how his whole point was like the human nature of things is to try to assert yourself above someone else, but through Christ we should be humble and be willing to be lowly and to actually bear other people's burdens, even though it's hard.
Yeah, he says like, we can come to our brother in his lowly state because we know that is where Christ found us.
Yeah, that'd be hitting hard. I want to throw this into the mix. It says, "For when does sin ever occur in a community that he does not examine and blame himself for? His own unfaithfulness in prayer and intercession, his lack of brotherly service, of reproof and encouragement, indeed, for his own personal sin and spiritual laxity, by which he has done injury to himself, the fellowship, and the brethren." I remember I think it was 2-3 semesters ago, I had a thought about what it means to love someone, and I might have mentioned this before, but like when I was a youth, I had the same question, and my mentor answered it as like, it's putting the needs and the wants of someone higher than yourself, right? It's like to love your neighbor as yourself. It's to put their needs as high as yours. And I think at the time I was thinking quite deeply about discipline and mortification, and I was thinking about like, maybe to love someone means to put their sin as seriously as your own. And like, that's not an easy thing to do. But I think it was partly touched on with our 90, was it our...
Exodus 90?
No, the Operation 90 group, where if one person failed, the first response was like, it wasn't how could you, or like, what the heck were you doing? It was like, crap. Like, I don't know, it seemed like the first response when someone relapsed was, how could I help you more? It seemed like the burden of failure wasn't necessarily on the person, though obviously he had contributed to that. But the first thing that we looked at was ourselves.
Yeah. And it's like that's when you're doing like individual to individual. And then here Bonhoeffer is talking about the whole community. Like, if your community is full of sin, if our church has this sinful culture, as people like to say, then it's like, where are we participating in that? Where are we failing by not praying enough for the church? It's like, we have no grounds on blaming anyone, but our only mindset should be like, how am I failing these guys? And so like, if our church is full of sin, and this community we're part of, people are struggling so hard, then that's convicting, because there's some ways in which we are failing to encourage them, to pray for them, to be supporting them. We don't have any grounds to complain to God, like, you put me in a church full of sinners, and that's I'm finding it so hard to do good because you place me in this community of. But it's like, no, he's placed you together so that you could bear one each other's burdens, and that line from Bonhoeffer, it really does convict. And I think if you take that seriously, then like when he talks about like speaking evil about someone, and even in previous chapters, whereas like when someone accuses the fellowship, the community, he should ask like, is it not I who am in sin? And like if you take that seriously, then it's just natural for the other things he says, that like you wouldn't speak evil against one another, because like whatever bad they're doing is directly relates to you. And it's not their failure, it's your failure as well.
Yeah, I think it's such a right response that he nails, that it's not a prideful thing. Like, it's easy to say like, oh, look at this guy, like he screwed up again. It's such a easy thing to like put yourself over this person, but it's a hard thing to actually admit and try to consider the possibilities that could have come if you actually considered their sin as seriously as your own. And I think that's where like it's sort of like the opposite, right? Like of what he was talking about before with speaking ill of someone. It's so easy for us to like try to justify, like gain ascendancy over someone by saying like he sinned. Look at this guy. He's in. Look at his position he's in. Like youth leader, like kids leader, whatever. But yeah, it's not your first response to say, what could have I done? Especially for the people that you're not close with, right? Like it's easy for me to like overhear like gossip or rumor about something that's going on with people, and hearing about like a leader's sin or whatever. But the first response isn't for me, definitely isn't, how can I help this person who I'm not particularly close with? It's what the heck? Like, get this guy out of leadership, you know?
And we don't think, well, why wasn't I encouraging this guy? Why aren't I praying for this guy? Why wasn't I supporting him when he did this? We just think, oh yeah, this guy's, he's down there now. Where I'm still up here, he's down there.
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't think that, but subconsciously, I think that drives a lot of it. But that's just so toxic to the true community that Bonhoeffer is talking about. Like we have to take on each other's sins, and I think like bearing each other's sins, I feel this is part of it. That when someone sins, you don't just say like, you know, they sinned, like how could they do that? But even if you don't know them, or even if you're not that close with them, it's like, yeah, what am I doing? Like, why wasn't I praying for them? Those are the real questions that we should be asking ourselves. And rather than talking evil about other people, saying this person did that, like, really, we should be confessing that, yeah, I didn't pray for my brother. I didn't encourage him enough. I wasn't secure enough to rebuke him earlier, and now it's led to this. And I think those are like, it's in those hard things which all require humility. That's where this true community is born, in doing all those things.
Yeah. I think what you mentioned is encapsulated by what he says. He says, it is the fellowship of the cross to experience the burden of others. If one does not experience it, the fellowship he belongs to is not Christian. If any member refuses to bear that burden, denies the law of Christ. It just makes me wonder, like, how Christian am I if I'm not actually bearing these hard burdens, if I'm not experiencing, you know, like what Christ experienced when he burdened, like he had to carry the cross, he had to carry like so much hardship with him and suffering with that.
And because we were talking about gossip, and now I'm thinking like, if we're gossiping about someone, or we're saying this person did that, or they're annoying, or they sinned like that, aren't we literally doing like what we're talking about? We're not bearing their sin. We're saying, that's his sin. He's doing this. Oh, I'm so annoyed. Like, oh, it's getting me so down that he's doing that. That we're in that moment, we're literally like assuming it's true, which often the case, it's either not true or it's exaggerated. Let's say it is true and it's not exaggerated. Then, like, we're heaping all his sin on him and we're refusing to bear it. Whereas if we were genuinely bearing that, we wouldn't be talking to other people about them. We would be talking to them and to other people, confessing our own complicity in what they did.
I think with that, I want to try to get to what this might mean more practically. So when I was reading this, I was like, how realistic, or how, like, is the call to actually bear every person's sin in the entire church community? Because like in the whole church is like 300 people, but in the English congregation, like what's generally more realistic is like 100 people. So do you think the call then, which he's speaking of, is to bear all 100? Like, yeah, genuine question.
Well, to expand that, like, biblically, there's only one church.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we refer to like Cabra Church, but really we're Cabramatta Parish,
Yeah.
part of a bigger church. And biblically, even the Anglican Church isn't the church.
Yeah.
There's only is one church. There only is one
Yeah.
body of Christ. And we're called to bear with everyone's burdens. But I think there is a sense in which we are called to bear with the whole body's burdens, and I can't even comprehend that. Like, there's like 1 billion Christians on the world. I don't know how that works, but I think that we are in some way called to bear with their burdens. I think that God does place us around certain people. Like, He's placed us all in our specific situation. He's placed us in like this parish, and certain people around us, and certain people in our families who are just naturally there. And I think, first and foremost, we should be faithful with what God has already given us, like right in front of us. And so we should, be thinking first of all to bear like the people who are closest to us first, before we can bear others.
Yeah. Even to attempt to bear the mammoth of a burden that is the whole church, like the universal church, the one church, you have to start somewhere, right? So even to like, to climb the mountain, it's one step at a time. Yeah. All right, there's one last section I do want to talk about, and this has been one of my favorite sections. It's where is it? The ministry of the meekness. Where is it? Oh, here it is. The one who lives by justification by grace is willing and ready to accept even insults and injuries without protest, taking them from God's punishment and gracious hand. He continues to saying, in any case, none of us will really act as Jesus and Paul did if they have not first learned, like them, to keep silent under abuse. The sin of resentment that flares up so quickly in the fellowship indicates again and again how much false desire for honor, how much unbelief still smolders in the community. I've been thinking a lot about Kung Fu Masters for some strange reason, and I recently finished the Avatar: The Last Airbender again, and there's a guy called, I think his name is Zhong. He's like this ex-Fire Nation guy. He sort of quit the military because he just disagreed with the ways of the Fire Nation when they invaded all the countries and whatnot.
See you in White Lotus?
Yeah. He's like he's like Aang's first fire bending
Right.
teacher that he tried to get off. But Aang didn't have self-control. Anyway, this is one of the things he mentions. He says, this is Zhong. I had a pupil once. He had no control in learning discipline. He was only concerned with the power of fire, how he could use it to destroy his opponents and wipe out the obstacles in his path. But fire is a horrible burden to bear. It's its nature to consume, and without control, it destroys everything without it. Learn constraint, or risk destroying yourself and everything you love. I think this is one of the things that just popped in my mind randomly when I was reading this, because it's so easy for us when we're under threat, like either verbally or like physically, to resort back in like fighting, like to fight and to hit back. But I think the idea I had with Kung Fu Masters is like, those goofy Kung Fu movies where there's this super badass mentor guy, and he sort of got into trouble with one of like the town's, I don't know, head violent leader or gang leader. And they're trying to like provoke a fight, and then the mentor sort of walks away to like avoid fighting, and then the gang leader throws a punch. But as he's walking away, he just dodges, and you're like, holy crap, it's on. Like, that stuff is gonna get serious. But I think it's what makes those scenes so, I guess, inspiring or like interesting is that the master's first response is never to resort to violence. It's always that self-controlled, I'm gonna avoid as much conflict as possible, or I'm gonna try to not hit back because I'm gonna destroy this guy. But I think what's interesting about Bonhoeffer's comment is it's more than that. It's not even self-control. It's just staying silent under abuse, like what Jesus had to do when he was put under trial, or what Paul had to do. And I think it's this idea of being meek, that is like having power and authority, but still not exercising any of that.
I actually never got into Kung Fu movies, but you paint a very vivid scene. Like, I can see it in my mind. I think it's very interesting that I think it's actually like every martial art. Like, they didn't teach you to get into fights. Like, the experience, the ethos they kind of pass on is like, yeah, exactly that, self-control and discipline, and to be in control. And if you are in control, then you wouldn't be spoiling for a fight in the first place. But there's a certain degree of security in yourself you need to have, because like the person who's spoiling for a fight, they want to prove themselves, or that they've been wrong, they want to get their honor back, or they want to save their face. The person who can just sit and not do anything when provoked he's the person that truly has self-confidence, and they know that, or they're confident that everything's going to be all right, even though they're being threatened. And to put that in the Christian context, like, I think that reveals how truly we trust in Christ, it's like how much are we willing to just trust in that, yeah, we're all right no matter what people are saying, or no matter if people are speaking against us or contradicting our point. It's like we don't need to go on and on and on, because if we trust in Christ, then like it'll be all right in the end. And so if our church is the kind of place where that's not the case, then it's like, are we trusting in Christ? Like people normally when they talk about trusting in God, they're thinking like, in terms of money or like financial security, but no one ever mentions like, what about just like normal security in general, like the security of yourself. Like if you trust in Christ, then yeah, you don't need to go through so much avenues to defend yourself, because in Christ nothing can hurt you.
Yeah, and I think like I've actually had somewhat of a growth experience of this. Like I remember when I was in high school, for context of my school and myself wasn't very intellectual, and I'm still not very intellectual, but I wasn't very well equipped with like apologetic stuff. So I remember there was one time when like a non-Christian came into church and he started asking me questions, or like started asking like questions about like, does God really exist and stuff like this. And I remember like it wasn't intentional, sorry, but I think it came out in such a bad way. And I'm sure that I'm pretty confident from memory that I was still like very insecure about my faith, because I wasn't entirely sure whether or not God existed, but I was stubborn. So like I lashed out. I spoke very poorly at the time, and it came out like Christians don't listen. Christians are closed-minded. But I think like since last year, I started reading more about apologetics, and there's been times when like people have sort of like come and asked like, oh, why do you believe in God? And it was in those moments where like I was actually much more calm, and I was much more like, well, I think these are the reasons why God exists, and these are the reasons why I think it's worth following Christ. And they were like, hey, that's really understandable. I'm like, oh, cool. Like security doesn't just come magically out of nowhere. It has to be built. Like the foundation has to be built somewhere.
And that's just like martial arts. Like when you know how to fight, you don't need to prove yourself, because you already know you can do it. And so you don't have to get into fights. Yeah.
And it's interesting because like I do remember like entering a bit of martial arts when I was younger, but I remember when they first like introduced it, they were like, the whole point of martial arts is to learn not to fight. And it's like, that's so weird. Like you're training to become strong. It's so countercultural. You're training to become stronger, but yet you're not using your strength to engage in more conflict, or to like, beef up in front of people who like wronged you. It's actually to avoid the conflict entirely. It's to exercise meekness. Yeah. And I think like martial arts is one of the few arts that we still have in modern society that like still teaches this idea of meekness.
And like humility.
Yeah, and discipline. Yeah. Cool. How about we call it there? This was episode 4. We hope you got something out of it.